us. In designing the program for this weekend, we wanted to incorporate two distinct aspects of what physicians and clinicians in primary care deal with. One is healing ourselves, and the other is learning how to deal with technology, and how is technology incorporating itself into our practice. As an intensivist, I've had the honor of being part of Sim Labs, where we teach and train residents and medical students how to manage patients, and have been the recipient of some knowledge base that has helped me take care of patients. And so, as a way of introduction, I want to introduce Stuart Damon to you, who is the director, I guess for lack of a better term, and a professor here at UNE in the Sim Lab group. And is it Diane? Don Marie Dunbar is the manager of the director. And this is going to be a widespread and still in development, widespread program still in development to help train medical professionals, both medical students, people that have graduated, EMTs, and looking forward to hearing from you guys and seeing how we can incorporate this. So to graduate 2003? 2000 program, yes. Yeah.
Thank you. It's actually kind of fun to be here. I have the task of talking about two things that really don't seem like they go together. Rural medicine and simulation. I joined the faculty here just over a year ago. I had wanted to be a faculty member at a medical school for as long as I can remember. So it's been a great deal of fun. My quick bio is I've done a lot of different things since graduating from UNE. My residency was in family medicine in Bangor. Along the way, I got interested in emergency medicine, and after completing residency, I practiced emergency medicine for about 7 or 8 years, or 7 years anyway. Then I had a practice of my own at New England Rehab, taking care of inpatients, doing their medical management. I worked with a physiatrist who ran the amputee program, so most of my patients were diabetic. I think in the couple of years that I did that, I had 2 patients who had traumatic amputations, and the rest of the however many were all patients who had diabetes as their primary medical problem. So I hope this works. Okay, so my disclosure is that I have no disclosure. Feedback, I am trying to learn how to use my voice a little more effectively. I'm a real soft talker, so I'm going to shamelessly solicit some feedback on that in the comments for the evaluation of the program. The other thing that I'm trying to learn how to do is make effective PowerPoint. So if you have some comments on the slides, I'm interested to know about that too. So to get started, my goal today is to postulate a rationale for using computerized robotic simulation at rural locations as a tool for reducing deficits in rural emergency medicine and emergency care. So some objectives, identify some health disparities, focusing in on emergency care, both pre-hospital, or primarily pre-hospital. Second one, define what high-fidelity computerized robotic simulation is, and talk a little bit about what goes into a simulation when we write a script. And also list some of the attributes of robotic simulation that make it a pretty good tool for reducing disparities in rural medicine. Give you the quick outline. Talk a little bit about rural health disparities first. Then talk a little bit about what simulation is. And then present to you an experience that we had this summer on Vinalhaven Island, where we took a simulator to the island to train the medical providers, nurses, and the EMS all together. So demographically, the ratio of physicians to population in rural areas is not in favor of rural locations, but 10% of the physicians in the country practice in rural locations, but 25% of the population lives in a rural county. The definition for rural that I'm using is a population of less than 50,000 in a county. Dental care, I'm not telling anybody anything that they don't already know. Dental care is a huge disparity in rural areas, about 40 dentists per 100,000, and in more urbanized areas, about 60 dentists per 100,000. Mental health, another area where we really struggle here in Maine. Of the roughly 1,700 areas designated back in '99 as mental health professional shortage areas, 87% were in rural locations. So those are really some pretty tough numbers for us to have to address. Oh my gosh. So ED coverage is something that comes up in my thinking about rural medicine. Camargo in 2008 published data from 2005, which indicated that if attrition was at about 12% or greater among practicing emergency physicians, the result would be that there would never be enough residency-trained board-certified emergency physicians to have such an individual in an emergency department, every emergency department in the United States for 24 hours a day, every day of the year. So that was the threshold. Getting to that in 2010, Camargo was also part of the group that looked at this, came up with an attrition rate of about 13%. So kind of right at that threshold of whether we'll ever catch up in emergency medicine or not. This is my conclusion. For the foreseeable future, we're going to continue to see physicians trained in general medicine, medical specialties, practicing in rural emergency departments. And I think that's going to be the trend at least until I am retired. And what remains to be seen, I think, is the effect of the ACGB single pathway on residency training. It may well prove that there are more emergency medicine residency spots created out of the merger that's coming up in the next 5 years or so. Okay, so emergency medical services. Jonathan Busco is a emergency medicine physician. He is also a paramedic. Dr. Busco was at Eastern Maine when I was a resident there, and he has written quite a lot about emergency medicine and the pre-hospital aspect of emergency medicine. Textbook that was published this year, he points out that most EMS services in rural locations are volunteer. The commitment that people are making is about 16 to 24 hours a week. So they're really taking up a lot of their personal time to do this. Maine Seacoast Vision, actually, based in Bar Harbor, published some information that says for about every one emergency, true emergency, in some locations, as many as 25 non-emergency pages would come to EMS, and EMS would provide some sort of analysis and assessment of the patient on scene. Dr. Busco also points out that EMS tends to train by itself. and don't usually train with other healthcare disciplines. And because of the shortage of emergency medicine trained physicians, many physicians who are practicing in the EDs have very little experience with medical imaging and what that role is about. Trauma, if you're in a rural location, trauma is a big deal. About 1/3 of all motor vehicle accidents occur in rural locations, but 2/3 of the fatalities from motor vehicle accidents occur in rural locations. The reasons for that, there's several reasons. The time for EMS to get on scene, the time to transport to a hospital, and then onto a trauma service at a tertiary care hospital. You can see the time disparity there, averaging about 18 minutes when you're out in the pucker brush, and about 10 minutes if you're in Portland. So 60% of all kinds of accidents, whether they be motor vehicle accidents or otherwise, are severe enough injuries to either result in death or life-threatening injuries. So living in rural areas is kind of a dangerous thing. 85% of the U.S. population lives within an hour of the trauma center. But only 24% of the rural population lives within that same 1 hour time frame. If you have a heart attack in a rural area, again, you have to get to a tertiary care facility. Some of the information you see here suggests that if you have a MI in a rural area, the care that you receive may be a little bit different than what you would receive in an urban location. Romati from 2005 published some information about door to balloon time, average 180 minutes or so nationally. In rural counties, 249 minutes. And so if time is myocardium, your heart attack is going to be worse. So kind of summing up this portion, if you are in a rural area, access to general medical services and emergency services is limited in comparison to urban locations. There is a disproportionate burden associated with trauma and delayed access to interventional services at tertiary care facilities is the rule rather than the exception. As I spent time putting this together, this question came into my mind more than once. I'm starting to believe that rural medicine is actually its own specialty. I think that the skill set that's required in emergency medicine is not unique, but what I do think is that the proportion of what is required in rural medicine is different. And I think also that with things like mental health and emergency care, you really have to take your abilities and skills in those areas further than you would in an urban area. Australia has done a lot of work in their National Health Service on this, and they have actually even stratified their systems such that there's rural healthcare and then also a remote healthcare component to their system. Moving into what simulation is, briefly, simulation as we think of it in terms of a robotic simulator first came along in the 1960s. There are some reports advocating use of obstetric simulators to 19th century or 17th century France. The first robotic simulator was called Sim1. It was developed by an anesthesia group. It was the vacuum tube sort of computer, so it took up a lot of space. And then in the 90s, in the 2000s, as you all know, computer tech took off and simulators became more and more sophisticated during that time. Concurrently, there was a lot of work done in medical education about using simulators and what the best approach to that was. To define high fidelity is really the extent to which a simulator reproduces human physiology, pathophysiology, and responds to interventions, the interventions that we would employ. The term itself comes from the audio industry. If you remember, at least I remember my parents having a hi-fi, and that's not going anywhere. There we go. Okay. So low fidelity simulations, those are things like Recessa Annie, which I think most of us remember. Task trainers like IV Start trainers and those sorts of things. Okay, so when we set up a simulation script, there are three components to it. The first is the pre-brief. We want to set the tone for the simulation, trying to establish an atmosphere of trust so that the people learning in the simulation are able to push themselves and not worry about being ridiculed or talked about if something doesn't go well. Try to provide a thumbnail of the scenario that's about to unfold, establish goals and objectives for the simulation. And then this term, try to encourage a willing suspension of disbelief. That's a term that comes from the movie industry. And the idea is that if you are able to allow the simulation to engage you sufficiently, you will set aside the fact that you're talking to a robot. To give you an example, I think most people are probably old enough to have seen The Terminator. Terminator is a great movie. It's a genre-defining movie, and part of the reason that is that the story is engaging enough for you to go on with the idea that Terminators exist. So, I don't know why that's doing that. Elements of simulation, we're continuing on. So the simulation encounter itself, the degree of difficulty can be tuned to the learners involved. Usual roles can be reversed. So if you are usually a physician and you are working with other physicians or other professionals, you can actually shift roles and become the nurse for the simulation. So this is a way of getting a sense of how other people work and what the stresses are that they encounter. So we can use live actors, and sometimes with simulation. Kobayashi Maru, anybody know the reference? So, Kobayashi Maru, for people who are not Star Trek fans, is an unwinnable situation. So far, nobody has hacked the computer at the sim lab in Portland that we know of to make it so that they can beat the unwinnable scenario. In any case, boy, I wasn't redundant there. And again, interprofessional education is something that can be done with simulation. The final piece of the simulation is the debrief. In the debrief, we're trying to go over what just happened. In simulations where there are high stakes, like in Kobayashi Maru, emotional responses are actually very common. We haven't done anything quite like that yet, so we haven't had anybody in tears. Try and extract some lessons learned, and when I talk a little bit about what we did on Vinalhaven, this last thing will become more apparent, but for that experience, we're actually able to make some changes in the way that we proceed at the medical center on the island. So we talked about Sim 1, we talked about developing simulation technology over the last 20 years, and defined high fidelity, and also talked about the simulation itself. So y'all recognize this, right? Okay. So I'm going to leave the black and white behind. And get you back to this simulation, or the PowerPoint. And so this is a picture of the harbor in Vinalhaven, Vinalhaven. So the town of Vinalhaven is actually, Vinalhaven itself is an archipelago of probably about 20 or 25 different islands that are all interconnected with one another. Vinalhaven is actually the most populous of the inhabited islands in Maine, about 1,165 in 2010. When the summer months come around, the population increases by about 3,000 people. So it's a very different place. Vinalhaven, the average age is above that of Maine. We have a fairly elderly population. Looking at the residents under age 5, we had 44 in 2010, and over 65, 190. And we have people on the island who are in their 90s, and there are some who are living in their own homes. Population density, Vinalhaven is a lot of land area with not a whole lot of people there. So we only have around 7 per square mile. Maine itself, the population density is about 43, and the US, 87 per square mile. So this is the sign outside our clinic. You can see from this that we actually have quite a different array of providers that we all work with. So we're an FQAC with all the stuff that goes with that. We have 3 providers that live on the island full time. 2 are nurse practitioners, 1 is a physician assistant. The 3 of those individuals work in a rotating schedule. So there are always 2 providers available and working and seeing patients in the office and taking call. And then the 3rd provider has a week off. So if you work there, you have 1 out of every 3 weeks off, which is not so bad. We have a nurse practitioner who comes once a month to do gynecological services, and then the part-time medical director, who is me. We also have, I just mentioned the rotating call schedule. We also have 2 dentists, both are part-time, and we have 2 hygienists as well. We have a full-time LCSW, we have a part-time LCSW, and we have a physical therapist. So we're actually set up pretty well. We can do a little bit of lab, and this is the only place I've ever been where, as a clinician, you take your own x-rays, which I think is really actually kind of fun. We send them electronically to Penn Bay, where they're read. Has anybody ever been to Vinalhaven? Okay. All right. So if you go to Vinalhaven and you have an emergency, one of these 6 people is going to be the person who puts in the IV. So there's about 1 person for every 200 people or so to put in an IV. Kind of really makes the point that things are different in rural areas. This is the EMS group. You'll see that there are a couple of common faces actually between the medical center. So this is one of the RNs, and this woman is a CNA. So there's a little cross-pollination that goes on. So we're an all-volunteer service. There's one intermediate EEMT, which is Pat Van Home right here. Everybody else is a basic. We get about 175 calls a year.
Are you still playing the?
Yeah, I'm still playing the YouTube. So we have a very unique setup in terms of the way we cover emergency calls. Our providers actually respond to the 911 pages. This is something that evolved long before I ever became involved with the island. And it really is driven by the necessity of mobilizing significant resources in order to get somebody off the island. The Maine EMS protocol guide allows for non-EMS system interveners. There's actually a little tab on the protocol guide for that. To become involved. If a provider does become involved, they are responsible for that patient and are required to travel with the patient to the emergency department. Because of that, we have a first call provider and a backup provider. And it's actually happened where the first call provider was off the island, the backup provider was off the island, and the third provider, who was off that week, got involved in an emergency involving law officer. So here's Sinman. We took him out to our island. We spent 3 days at the medical center working with the providers there, the nursing staff there, and EMS from the island. We originated simulations in the medical center, and we also originated simulations from the community. We did a total of 7 different scripts and 8 simulations. We ran one simulation twice. 3 of the simulations we used a live actor. The rest were with the robotic simulator. We actually took the time to create and upload fictional records into our EMR because we wanted to make this as close to what real life would be like for us. Our providers have an iPad with cellular capability, and they can actually bring up the patient's record from a location on the island and look at their past history. We got Knox County Dispatch to help us out. They toned out the scenarios just as though they were 911 pages. And again, we included all those groups. Our goal was to integrate the paramedic portion of the EMS protocol as a template for our providers. What we realized is that depending on the circumstances, there are times when adopting the role of the paramedic made more sense. We can provide a higher standard of care, and we also wanted to enhance communication between providers and the EMS group. So our first simulation was a live actor simulation with a code stroke. This is my truck. The way this simulation went was that a family member drove the patient up to the medical center and ran in the building and said, "I think somebody's having a stroke." So EMS got toned out. They got the patient out of the vehicle, and we took this to the extreme of loading the patient in the ambulance. This particular day was overcast, so nobody was flying, and we took this patient down to the ferry terminal as part of the simulation. Another view of what we were doing. This simulation was a near drowning at one of the swimming quarries. So there's the swimming quarry. We talked to the people there who were there to swim in advance and let them know what we were doing. I have heard that if you give a slide presentation, you also have to include a picture of yourself. So that's the picture of me. This is Professor Dunbar right here. We're sitting in my truck and running the simulation there. So at this point, these are all EMS folks that you're seeing in the picture. Our next simulation talked about today was a patient who presents to the medical center with chest pain and then suddenly lapses into VTAC. This is the simulation where we really learn something about what we've been doing. We've never actually.
Oh, you're going to turn your volume back up.
So what's just happened here is that we had never actually run a code. We've never had somebody code in the medical center. And we discovered that we do not have a protocol for this. The nurse does not have any protocol that allows her to give aspirin or to apply oxygen. We didn't have a way of summoning a provider to the room. The nurse actually had to leave the room and go find the provider. And she is particularly upset right at the moment because not only has the patient gone into VTAC while she was gone, she had to search around a little bit to find the provider. We also learned some other stuff during this simulation as well. Which I'll show you here. What do you see in this picture that really is kind of a problem?
The bed.
Yeah, the bed is bouncing up and down. This stretcher has probably been around, I don't know how long. But we, again, had never run a code, so we didn't know that this stretcher was not adequate for the purpose. So that was one of the lessons that we learned, and we also have now purchased a new stretcher. So now we've got SimMan all packaged up and ready to go. What do? So amateurs talk tactics and professionals study logistics. This was said by a Marine Corps General, Robert Barrow. He was Commandant of the Marine Corps. For those of you, the Marine Corps is the junior service of the Department of the Navy. You can tell that I was certain the Navy. So our decision making really is driven by two things. If it's trauma, it's mechanism. If it's a med surg issue, then it's suspected diagnosis. And the weather is the thing that dominates how we get people off the island. This is how I usually get to Vinalhaven on Fridays when I go. Not too bad. Fixed wing, we can fly to Owl's Head, just a little south of Rockland, in about 15 minutes. We meet ground EMS there, and then we travel to the medical center. And this time of year it would be about 15 minutes, and in the summer it can be as much as about 30 minutes. One of the big issues for us, regardless of how we're getting patients off the island, is decompensation. And that's the reason that we really decided to try and integrate the paramedic role. I'll tell you a story about what happened with one patient this summer. She's known as the cowgirl on the island now. This is a 20-year-old woman who was running on one of the farms on the island with a cow. And she had the lead rope to the cow. And the cow stopped suddenly. She kept going and ended up in the air and kind of cracked her head into the ground. We flew her by fixed wing to Tenbay, and she went from there to Maine Medical Center. Turned out she had a badly comminuted occipital bone fracture, a orbital root fracture, and 2 subdurals. Tough cow, I think. Relatively, we can get live flight from Bangor, and the round trip is less than an hour, if everything goes well. The closest Coast Guard is actually Cape Cod Air Station. So it'll be about a 90-minute flight up, and then from there. This is our waterborne transport for the most part. Maine State Ferry Service is what runs this. It's an hour and 15 minutes, and then another 15 minutes or so to the medical center. We actually drive our ambulance onto the ferry. So we have everything with us there. Complications may be a little bit easier to manage. The cowgirl did actually start to vomit in the airplane. And the provider and the EMS person who went along actually had to turn her on her side in a Cessna 172. Ferry crew is subject to DOT rules, and this actually can complicate things tremendously. They have a minimum 8-hour rest interval overnight that they have to observe. If we call out the ferry at 8 o'clock at night, that's not too big a deal. If we call out the ferry at midnight or after, then it becomes a very big deal. Calling out the ferry late disrupts the ferry schedule for the next day, because they have to have that 8-hour interval, and it really disrupts what happens on the island. Now, the thing that's great about this is the name of this boat. Evening Call is the name of the boat. It's just pure happenstance that that's the picture, but it sort of fits. So lobster boat is another way people get out the island. It's an open boat. Usually the weather is not very good. Only what you can carry. Usually about 3 or 5 of these a year. The boat captain can't be reimbursed by the medical center because of the HRSA rules. And the other thing is that the patient population that we take mostly are moms in labor. So the Coast Guard would be another option for us. Anybody know why you have to be 6 feet tall to join the Coast Guard?
So if the ship sinks, they can walk the shore.
Exactly. That's awesome. My comment for this is rest trips a lot will cure. The thing speaks for itself. So if we have to call the Coast Guard, we're in trouble. Our final option is to put a patient in our stretcher. And we have about 1 or 3 a year. And the provider that's on call stays with the patient right in the medical center all through the night. This is a photo of actually several different people. This is the fire chief. This is the nurse who is in the little video. This is the EMS chief, and this is actually Sam Broder, who is one of our medical students. So to kind of sum this up a little bit, simulation, I think, is very faithful to human physiology and pathophysiology. We can see the effect of an intervention very quickly. It can be local practice specific. Like I said, our EMS after hours call is unusual. And taking a simulator to the location actually allows us to use the simulator to train to that specific need. Safely and repeatedly train for things that are infrequent but potentially catastrophic. Interprofessional. We can reverse roles. Sort of fun. So. I don't know. All right. So enough of that. So we're back from Oz. And so, as a tool for reducing disparities, the case that I want to make is that simulation is actually a very good fit. The acuity that we find in rural locations is no less than that of anywhere else. The mortality burden is disproportionate. The frequency of presentations is reduced due to population density, and there are some unusual circumstances that compel different models in creating a system that works. I think that this is going to continue to be true, that for the foreseeable future, rural emergency departments will have non-EM residency training certified physicians. I think simulation is a way to close the gap. This is actually a very interesting statement. The National Council of State Boards of Nursing in 2012 came out with a statement that said that up to 50% of their traditional clinical training can be replaced by simulation. I think that's pretty interesting. Here are my references. Questions?
What's the state of the SIM program here at UNE?
Well, at UNE, well, there's two answers to the question. At the university as a whole, there is a simulation lab in Portland. It is predominantly used by nursing, nurse anesthetist students. Pharm D students also participate in physician assistants.
Would you like me to answer that question?
Sure.
Sure. So I'm the lady with the laptop in the truck. I'm Professor Dunbar. I'm actually a graduate of UNE as well, many, many years ago when we were all on the same campus together and knew each other. So welcome back to UNE. We're glad that you're here. We actually, in Portland, serve all of the health professions at UNE, including the Westbrook College of Health Professions, which has 7 programs. And we've been doing that for 10 years now. We also have the College of Pharmacy, and for the very first time this summer, we have the College of Dental Medicine. We've done some Insight to training here for medical students, as well as athletic training and exercise science. Starting last spring was the first time that we had official rotations for second-year medical students, and they came up and did a rotation with us. And this year is starting for full integration for second-year students. So we've already had students coming for their initial sim experience, as well as they'll come again in the spring. But our hope is we're moving to a new facility. We will be retrofitting the Armory space in Portland and doubling our space. So we'll have more space to be able to have everybody there. But in addition to that, the standardized patient program that's currently located here will come and share the space with us. And simulation and standardized patients working together is like the best utopic thing that we could have. Because we do use live actors sometimes, and you all did lots of standardized patients, I'm sure, so you remember how beneficial that was. So together it works out really well.
I'm really glad that Professor Dunbar came today. Other questions?
So it seems like you need, in order to properly run the simulation on a rural island, you need, kind of a lot of equipment, specialized training to run the equipment. What's a suggestion for, a rural community that wants to improve and narrow the gap for healthcare providers that they can do now, rather than having to upgrade?
I think the answer to that question is that whether it is the university or it is another entity here in Maine, if an entity with capability for simulation were to take their simulator to the rural location and develop simulations based on their local practice. I think that's actually doable. There are many simulation labs around the country where EMS will come to the simulation lab. This particular experience, I think, actually suggests to me that it's that there's some value in taking the simulator to the site. I think that the lessons that you learn out of that are pretty significant. So.
So that's a great question. And one of the things that the literature supports is for post-licensure professionals, actually doing simulation in situ is the preferred method. For pre-licensure and the simulation lab works really well. And actually the study done by the State Board of Nursing that Dr. Damon cited was actually done with pre-licensure nursing students. So that's not post-licensure professionals. I think one of the things that Dr. Damon didn't talk about, that as us as educators, this experience was profound. It talked to us a lot about the community partnerships that we feel are important to establish. We were fortunate enough that we had a medical student on the island with us, as well as there was a nursing student from UNE that was doing a summer internship there. So not only were our students to be able to participate in that training, but one of my jobs is looking at the interprofessional aspects and opportunities that we have for training for our students. These island people were extraordinary. They have no choice. They have to work interprofessionally. They have to understand each other's roles and responsibilities, and they have to have good communication. What was amazing about these people is we would come in the morning at 7, do a couple of simulations with them. They would see patients all day long, and then when 5 or 6 o'clock rolled around, they were like, okay, we're ready to go. How many simulations are we going to do now? And we're like, wow. I mean, they were so appreciative of what we had to offer, Sam's here, and I think it was a pretty good learning experience for you. And I know from the nursing students' perspective, we talk to them a lot about interprofessional practice while they're here, but you got to see it. And those people have no choice, they have to do it. I think it also reminded us as faculty that there are so many opportunities for us to go out into the community and bring our students so that they can see things. All of our simulators are wireless, so we're really not held back. And in fact, we even had to prepare the ferry people because they're kind of strict about stuff. And if they don't like you, you don't get to the island or back. We wanted to make sure they knew that he wasn't real because we didn't have a ticket for him. And he was sitting in the back of Dr. Damon's truck, looking like a regular person. So we were pretty careful about that. I think it also gave us an opportunity to really role model what that interprofessionalism looks like. They were extraordinary people, and I hope we get to go back. And they fed us lobster every day, so that was a little bit of a bonus. So.
Yeah, one of the other things about this that really struck me is that we would run simulation in the morning, and by the time the end of the day came around, and we were going to go out in town and run the simulation from there, they had already integrated the things that we had talked about into their practice. So if we saw a communication issue or whatever it might have been, the changes that we talked about had already been integrated by the time the day was over. Other questions? Or?
Just a quick comment. You listed off all the technological aspects of this and getting to the island, getting back, but from my perspective as an observer, one of the really critical parts is having facilitators like you and Marie, who have such a wide experience and knowledge base that you could step into the role of the nursing student or the nurse or the ER doc or the hospitalist. And do you view that as a limitation with other programs going forward, finding practitioners who have kind of, like you said, rural medicine is going to be a specialty. and it's a specialty that you work in. So could you see a normal ER doc walking in and running these scenarios, or do you think it takes someone who has more experience where you're going?
I think one of the things that makes rural medicine, part of what makes it a challenge is the logistical piece of it. That is such an overriding factor on an island, and even on the mainland in rural areas here in Maine. Weather is a significant issue, transport times are a significant issue, so that's definitely a thing that I had to learn as I did it. Tertiary care medical centers, we're always going to train there. I think that simulation may allow us to do some high-intensity training in local areas where we practice. If indeed it is the case that up to 50% of clinical training can be provided through simulation, then I think there is that opportunity to take what you have learned at the tertiary care center and take it out into some of these locations where there are these other challenges, and see how it works. I see simulation as a way of doing that. As to a ER doc in a tertiary care center going to a rural location, they would face the same challenges that anybody who's practiced in a urban area would face going to a rural location. You have to find a way to learn those things and those details that you won't know about unless you do it.
And Dr. Damon and I spent a lot of time listening. We spent a lot of time listening to the staff that's there and has to practice there every day, and asking a lot of questions. In fact, we probably did more listening and asking questions than we did planning. So we really needed to understand their environment in order to support their training.
So I think we're probably done with time, but.
Actually, I have one last question.
Sure.
So what resources are currently in place for post-licensure training? Let's say you are practicing in a rural or underserved area in Maine, and you want to take advantage of some of these resources. What's out there right now, and what work needs to be done to build that capacity?
Well, I think a lot of work needs to be done to build the capacity. To my knowledge, what we did in taking the simulator to the island, it was almost unique. I really looked hard to find any literature about what we were doing, and I could not really find anything other than a couple of what you might call more or less case reports. I think that there is an enormous opportunity for the university to take the lead role in this, really, and to reach out into all parts of Maine and make this kind of training available. Okay. Did I answer your question? Or?
Yeah.
Okay.
I noticed they've changed the font